Victor Hale was halfway through barking orders into his phone when Elena Carter's voice sliced through the air like a scalpel. Sir, you could die before sunrise. The words froze him mid-sentence. His sharp blue eyes lifted from the gleaming desk to the woman in a faded gray cleaning uniform, holding a bucket in one hand and a rag in the other. Excuse me? He scoffed, lowering the phone. Did you just diagnose me? What are you now, the CEO of Mops and Brooms? His sarcasm was a weapon, polished from years of crushing anyone who dared to challenge him. Elena didn't flinch. She had seen this before. The subtle tremor in his left hand, the faint slur curling around certain words, the way his gaze struggled to stay focused. Signs that screamed danger to anyone trained to hear the silent alarms of the human body. But Victor only saw a cleaning lady interrupting his million-dollar deals. Sir, Elena said evenly, her voice steady but urgent, your blood pressure is spiking and your coordination is off. You need a doctor now. He laughed, the kind of cold, dismissive laugh that could send junior executives into tears. I have the best doctors money can buy, and none of them have mentioned anything. Get back to your chemicals and leave the medicine to professionals. Elena lowered her eyes, but inside her mind was already racing. She'd been here before, watching a man's pride build a wall so high it blocked the only path to saving his life. And she knew this. If she didn't act soon, Victor Hale might not live to see another sunrise. If you were standing there, holding the knowledge that could save someone who despised you, would you walk away? Or risk everything to help them? Elena Carter hadn't always worn a cleaning uniform and carried a bucket through the marble corridors of Greystone Industries. Once, she wore crisp white scrubs and walked with the confidence of a woman who knew she was saving lives. For 15 years, she'd been the head nurse of the neurology department at one of Chicago's largest hospitals. Her colleagues called her the pulse reader because she could sense something wrong in a patient before the machines did. But all that ended 5 years ago on a night shift that still haunted her dreams. A middle-aged black man named Henry Turner came in, doubled over in agony. Elena had seen his condition 100 times. He needed immediate pain relief. But Dr. Marcus Vell, the hospital's star physician and a favorite of the board, ordered a lower dose than what the same condition would have warranted for a white patient. Elena confronted him right there in the hallway, voice low but fierce. You're underdosing him, she said. You've done this before. I have records. That night she began compiling a report. 200 pages of dosage patterns, patient outcomes, and a damning trend that showed black patients consistently receiving less pain medication. It wasn't just a mistake, it was systemic bias. When she submitted it to the hospital's ethics committee, she expected outrage. Instead, she got silence. 2 weeks later, she was called into the office of the hospital director, Dr. Elaine Garrison, who listened without expression before sliding a file across the desk. You're being investigated for violating medication protocols, she said flatly. The allegations were baseless, but powerful enough to destroy her. Within months, she lost her nursing license, her job, and her health insurance. Friends she'd worked alongside for years suddenly avoided eye contact in the grocery store. With bills piling up and her apartment lease expiring, she took the only job she could get, night cleaning offices. In those lonely hours, pushing a mop across polished floors, Elena carried two things with her: the pain of injustice and the unshakable instincts of a nurse. She could not turn them off. That was why she noticed Victor Hale's decline when no one else did. It began subtly. He would lean heavily on the edge of his desk as if the floor tilted under him. He'd fumble for words in meetings, repeat a question minutes after asking it, or blink rapidly as if trying to clear fog from his vision. The executives around him dismissed it as fatigue or the stress of running a multi-billion-dollar company, but Elena recognized the pattern immediately. Something neurological was stealing pieces of him in plain sight. Each night after her shift, she would sit at her small kitchen table and write down what she'd seen. The angle of his head tilt, the hesitation before he signed a document, the minute tremor in his dominant hand. She didn't know yet what she would do with the information, only that she couldn't ignore it. Then fate intervened. One evening, as she was helping an elderly receptionist who had tripped in the parking garage, a voice spoke behind her. You were a nurse. Elena looked up to see a tall, silver-haired woman watching her with knowing eyes. Dr. Lorraine Bennett had been a neurologist for 3 decades before semi-retirement. I can still spot competence, she said warmly. Over coffee at a nearby diner, Elena told her everything about Victor Hale, the symptoms, the dismissals, the arrogance. Lorraine listened without interrupting, then leaned forward. Brain tumor, aneurysm, or a progressive degenerative disease. Whatever it is, it's serious and it's moving fast. Have you been documenting? Elena slid her notebook across the table. Lorraine flipped through the pages, nodding. This man needs a full neurological evaluation yesterday. And if he refuses, we go to the one person who can make him his wife. Elena hesitated. The idea of confronting Amelia Hale, a woman she'd never met, felt like walking into a storm. But storms didn't scare Elena Carter anymore. She had already survived the worst one of her life. From that night on, Elena treated her little black notebook like it was a patient's life monitor. Because in a way it was. Every tremor, every lapse in Victor's focus, every time he misused a word or stared at a document as if it had transformed into a foreign language, she logged it with the precision of a surgeon marking an incision. She even began timing the episodes, noting whether they came at the end of long meetings, after sudden bursts of anger, or seemingly without warning. The patterns were forming, and they frightened her. Lorraine Bennett became her quiet ally, meeting Elena once a week in a corner booth of a small cafe where the waitress didn't mind if they lingered for hours. They would go through the entries together, Lorraine occasionally asking questions like, was the tremor isolated to one side? Or, did he lose words mid-sentence or replace them with the wrong ones? Elena would answer, flipping back through her notes until they found the right page. One entry in particular made Lorraine set her coffee cup down with a sharp click. He called his chief of operations by the wrong name. Twice? In the same meeting? Elena nodded. And no one said anything. They just kept going, like it was normal. Lorraine shook her head. It's not normal. It's classic temporal lobe involvement. They both knew what that meant. The clock was ticking. But the greatest obstacle wasn't medical. It was Victor's pride. He had the kind of ego that could walk into a hurricane and insist the wind was only a light breeze. If he wouldn't listen to his wife, Amelia, there was almost no chance he would listen to anyone else. But Lorraine had an angle. Amelia studied nursing before she married him, right? Elena confirmed this. She'd done her research. Then she'll understand exactly what your notes mean. And unlike anyone else, she has the emotional leverage to force his hand. Elena hesitated, picturing herself standing in front of Amelia Hale, this elegant woman who lived in a world of charity galas and private drivers, handing over a notebook filled with observations from the company's cleaning lady. She might not even believe me, Elena said. She will if I'm there, Lorraine replied firmly. Over the next week, Elena's documentation grew even more meticulous. She began writing short narrative descriptions alongside the clinical notes. How Victor's jaw clenched when he forgot a word. How he glanced quickly around the room to see if anyone noticed. How the air in the boardroom seemed to shift when his sentences faltered. There was a moment, late one evening, when she almost lost her resolve. She was wiping down the glass conference table when Victor came in alone, jacket slung over his shoulder, looking tired. Not the sharp, unshakable man who cut down subordinates with a single look, but a human being worn thin. For a second, she saw the patient he didn't know he was yet. Long day? She asked quietly before she could stop herself. He looked at her blankly as if he couldn't quite place her face, then recovered with a faint smirk. Long life, he said, and walked out. Elena stood there for a long time after he left, clutching the rag in her hand, wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to reach him before it was too late. That was when she made her decision. She and Lorraine would approach Amelia no matter the risk. Because sometimes saving a life meant stepping into a world that had no place for you, armed with nothing but the truth and the courage to speak it. Lorraine was right. Amelia Hale was not a woman who ignored warning signs, especially when they involved the man she had built a life with for over 25 years. But she was also no stranger to his stubbornness. The first time she hinted that Victor might need a full checkup, he brushed it off with a dismissive laugh, claiming he knew his body better than any doctor. Over the weeks that followed, she began to notice what Elena had been documenting for months, the way his once flawless memory faltered, his temper igniting at the smallest inconvenience, his pen scratching uneven lines across a signature that had always been bold and precise. Alex, their 27-year-old son and a final-year medical student, had seen it too. One Sunday evening over dinner, Alex asked gently, "Dad, when was your last complete physical?" Victor didn't even look up from his plate. "Checkups are for sick people, Alex. I'm fine." Amelia caught her son's eye, and in that shared glance was the unspoken truth. They both knew something was wrong. The incident that shattered her patience happened 3 days later. Victor walked into his office mid-morning, where Elena was quietly vacuuming the corner. He paused, staring at her for several seconds, his brow furrowed. "Who are you?" The words were so stark, so devoid of recognition, that Elena froze. "It's Elena," she said softly, "from the cleaning staff. I've been working here for 2 years." He blinked rapidly, his eyes glassy, before shaking his head slightly, as though brushing away an invisible cobweb. "Right, of course. Just get back to it." The mask of irritation slid back over his face, but for Elena the damage was done. She knew this was no longer about pride or arrogance. Something inside his brain was actively unraveling. That evening, she called Lorraine from the break room, her voice low but urgent. "Today, he didn't recognize me for several minutes. This isn't just decline, it's acceleration." Lorraine didn't hesitate. "Then we move now. I'll call Amelia myself." The following morning, Amelia received the call. Lorraine introduced herself as a neurologist and explained, in precise but compassionate terms, what Elena had observed and documented. Amelia listened in silence, each symptom another nail driven into the coffin of denial she had been trying to keep shut. "It's called anosognosia," Lorraine explained. "It means he may be physically incapable of recognizing his own symptoms. The disease blinds the patient to the reality of their condition." "So he doesn't know he's sick," Amelia murmured. "No, and the longer we wait, the harder it will be to reverse." Amelia stared out the window of her sunlit kitchen, the sound of Victor's heavy footsteps echoing faintly from upstairs. "He'll never agree to tests unless he's backed into a corner," she said finally. "Then that's what we'll do," Lorraine replied. Over the next 48 hours, Amelia crafted a plan. She invited the top executives of Greystone Industries to what she called a strategic succession discussion at their home. It wasn't unusual for her to host formal gatherings, and Victor's ego ensured he wouldn't refuse. Behind the scenes, she coordinated with Alex and Lorraine to be present, disguising the intervention as a business meeting until the critical moment. Elena, meanwhile, kept to her routine, but her senses were heightened. She felt the tension in the air every time Victor walked past her in the hallway, his gait slightly uneven, his left arm not swinging as freely as the right. She kept her face neutral, but inside she was counting the days, knowing each one could be his last without intervention. On the morning of the meeting, a heavy rain pounded the city, the kind that blurred skylines and slowed traffic to a crawl. Elena arrived early to clean the downstairs conference room, knowing she might be called upon in ways no cleaning job had ever prepared her for. Upstairs, Amelia stood before the mirror, her hands steady as she applied lipstick, a shield for the battle ahead. She wasn't just a wife that morning. She was a woman about to confront her husband in front of the people whose respect he valued most, in the hope that the shock would break through his pride. None of them knew if it would work, but they all knew they were out of time. The storm outside had not let up when the black sedans began arriving at the Hale estate. One by one, Greystone's top executives stepped out under umbrellas, greeted by the polite efficiency of the household staff. Victor descended the staircase slowly, his hand brushing the railing a second longer than necessary, his eyes scanning the foyer with a mix of suspicion and pride. "I don't see why we need to talk about succession," he muttered to Amelia, his voice carrying the slight drag of a man trying to disguise fatigue. "It's just preventive planning," she said, her tone light, her eyes watchful as he fumbled with his tie, attempting 3 knots before settling for one that was barely straight. The dining room was warm and inviting, the long mahogany table set with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses. Amelia had planned it to disarm him, to make this feel like any other evening of polite corporate strategy. But beneath the polished surface, every detail had a purpose. Lorraine sat unobtrusively near the end of the table, introduced as a consultant for executive wellness. Alex was positioned beside her, ready to support whatever needed to be said. Elena moved silently along the perimeter, refilling water glasses and clearing side plates, her eyes trained on Victor's every move. The first sign came 20 minutes into the conversation. Victor referred to Thomas Grant, his CFO of 10 years, as the guy from marketing. Thomas blinked in surprise but said nothing. Amelia's gaze flicked to Lorraine, who gave a barely perceptible nod. 10 minutes later, Victor repeated a question he had already asked twice, his voice sharper now, as though challenging the table to contradict him. "Richard," Thomas began, catching himself just in time to replace the slip with Victor. But the damage was done. Amelia rose slowly, her hands resting on the back of her chair. "We need to talk about something more important than succession," she said, her voice clear and commanding. Victor's eyes narrowed. "And what would that be?" Lorraine leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, I've observed troubling symptoms, tremors, confusion, impaired coordination. These are not signs to ignore." Victor slammed his palm on the table, the force rattling the cutlery. "There is nothing wrong with me. I'm sick of unqualified people trying to diagnose me." He stood abruptly, as if to punctuate his health with action, but his body betrayed him. His knees buckled, his left side sagged, and he collapsed back into the chair, his face twitching, words coming out in a slurred, desperate jumble. I don't, where?" Glasses clinked as he reached clumsily for water, his right hand shaking so violently that the glass tipped, spilling across the linen tablecloth. Amelia's composure cracked for the first time. "Call 911, she shouted, her voice sharp with fear. Lorraine was already on her feet, her movements swift and practiced. "Possible stroke or seizure," she instructed to the operator. Alex steadied his father's shoulders, speaking calmly into his ear, even though Victor's eyes had lost their focus. In the chaos, Elena stepped closer to Amelia, her voice low but urgent. "Mrs. Hale, I need you to know, I've been documenting his symptoms for weeks. Everything you've seen tonight, I have recorded in detail." Amelia turned to her in shock. "You're a nurse?" "I was," Elena replied, "before I was forced out and left to clean offices for people who think I'm invisible." Her tone held no self-pity, only the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. "Your husband has all the signs of a brain aneurysm or a tumor. My report covers every episode, every change, time-stamped and analyzed. I sent it to the board 3 days ago. They ignored it." The words hit Amelia like a wave, but there was no time to process. Paramedics rushed in, their uniforms dark against the pale gold of the dining room. They loaded Victor onto a stretcher, his breathing shallow, his eyes half-lidded. As the gurney passed her, Elena stepped back into the shadows, unnoticed by most in the room. But Amelia noticed. She saw the quiet strength, the calm in the storm, and she knew in that moment that this woman, this cleaning lady, might just have saved her husband's life. The ambulance roared away into the storm, red lights slicing through the sheets of rain. Amelia stood at the open doorway until the sound faded, her hands trembling as she gripped the frame. Inside the dining room, the once polished dinner scene was a wreck. Half-drunk glasses, silverware askew, and a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Elena had slipped away quietly, but her words clung to Amelia like a shadow. A report, time-stamped, ignored. In the back of the ambulance, Victor lay pale against the stretcher, an oxygen mask pressed to his face. He drifted in and out of awareness, catching only fragments of the paramedics' rapid exchanges. "Pressure's high, left-sided weakness, possible bleed." At the hospital, Dr. Alan Chen, the on-call neurosurgeon, met them at the ER entrance. A quick CT scan confirmed what Elena had predicted with unsettling accuracy: a slow-bleeding brain aneurysm, dangerously close to rupture. "If this had gone untreated another few days, we'd be planning a funeral, not surgery," Dr. Chen said, pulling off his gloves. Amelia closed her eyes, a wave of relief and fear crashing over her. Back at Greystone headquarters, word began to spread, and by morning the headlines were everywhere. "Cleaning lady saves CEO's life." Reporters swarmed the company gates. But the story wasn't just about Victor's illness. It was about the 47-page medical report Elena had compiled and sent to the board, warning them weeks in advance. Emails leaked to the press showed Thomas Grant dismissing it as employee paranoia, and Claire Morgan is suggesting she be removed for overstepping her role. Within 72 hours, Greystone's stock dropped $300 million. Public outrage exploded across social media, with hashtags calling for the resignation of anyone who had ignored her warnings. Elena, however, stayed out of the spotlight. She turned down interview requests and refused any payout offers from the company. When a reporter caught her outside her small apartment building and asked why, she said simply, "Competence doesn't come with a title, and dignity isn't for sale." Inside the hospital, Victor awoke after surgery, groggy and disoriented. Amelia was at his bedside, her fingers curled around his. His first words were little more than a whisper. Where's the cleaning lady?" "Elena," Amelia said softly. "She's here. She's been waiting in the hallway for 6 hours." Victor's eyes glistened, the memory of his dismissive words and cold laughter hitting him like a weight. "She tried to warn me. More than once," he murmured. "And I treated her like someone beneath you." Amelia finished for him, her voice neither harsh nor forgiving, just truthful. "You're lucky she didn't treat you the same way." When Elena entered, still in her work uniform, Victor struggled to meet her gaze. "You saved my life," he said, his voice cracking. "I've been trying to save it for weeks," she replied evenly. "You just chose not to listen." He closed his eyes briefly, shame pooling in the lines of his face. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "You don't," she agreed. "But I didn't do it for you. I did it because I swore an oath to protect lives, and some oaths matter more than the treatment we receive from the people we save." The room was silent except for the hum of machines. In the days that followed, the scandal deepened. The board held an emergency meeting, and both Thomas Grant and Claire Morgan were fired for discriminatory conduct. Greystone announced sweeping diversity and ethics reforms, but the public skepticism was palpable. Meanwhile, Amelia kept every piece of evidence, emails, meeting recordings, copies of Elena's report, ensuring the truth would never be buried. 1 week later, as Victor began physical therapy to regain his coordination, Elena returned to her night shift. But everything had changed. Employees who once walked past her without a glance now greeted her with quiet respect. Some even stopped to thank her. She accepted it politely, but she didn't linger. She wasn't doing this for gratitude. She was doing it because it was who she was, a healer, even if the world chose not to see it. And though Victor Hale had survived the aneurysm, the real question lingered in the air like the fading scent of rain. Had he learned the lesson that nearly cost him his life? 6 months later, the stage lights of the National Civic Auditorium bathed Elena Carter in a golden glow. She stood at the podium in the same gray cleaning uniform she had worn the night she confronted Victor Hale, though tonight it was pressed and framed by the presence of senators, medical leaders, and cameras from every major network. The inscription on the plaque she was about to receive read, "For extraordinary courage and service in saving lives beyond duty." In the front row, Victor sat in a wheelchair he still needed for longer distances, his hands steady now, but his eyes unsteady with emotion. Next to him, Amelia watched Elena with the quiet pride of someone who had seen her strength firsthand. Elena spoke without notes, her voice carrying across the hall. "For 15 years, I was a nurse. For 5 years, I was a cleaning lady. But titles never defined me, only the work I was willing to do and the lives I was willing to fight for. That night, I didn't save a CEO. I saved a man whose life mattered, even if he didn't see mine the same way." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. She continued, "We live in a world that often measures worth by wealth, power, and status. But true worth is measured by compassion, by the courage to act when no one else will. Competence has no color. Dignity has no rank. Humanity has no price tag." The ovation was long and unbroken, but in the front row, Victor remained seated for a moment longer before standing, slowly, deliberately joining the applause with tears on his cheeks. When the ceremony ended, he approached her in the hallway, the noise of celebration fading behind them. "I was an arrogant fool," he said simply, "but fools can learn if they choose." She smiled faintly. "Then choose well, Mr. Hale." That night, the photo of them shaking hands would appear on every news outlet, a visual reminder that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's becoming so great they can never again diminish you. If it were you, would you have walked away from the man who humiliated you? Or would you have saved him anyway? Share your thoughts below.